My son handed me a check for $20,000 and said, "Go live in some dump outside the city." He had just sold my home, the one his late father built for $1.5 million. I smiled and nodded, because he had no idea what I'd done just days before he sold my home. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is the story of how greed blinded my son, how betrayal nearly broke me, and how one quiet decision changed everything. If you enjoy true emotional stories like this, be sure to like the video and share it with someone who'd love it too. That house wasn't just a building. It was where I learned to be a wife, a mother, and eventually, a widow. Every wall in it held laughter, tears, and echoes of a time when love still meant something. My husband, Michael, laid the foundation with his own hands. He wasn't a rich man, but he was proud of what he built, proud of the family we were raising. He used to say, "This home will keep you safe, even when I'm gone." When cancer took him away, that house became my only companion. I would sit on the porch each morning with my coffee, watching the sun rise over the oak tree he planted the day our son, Ethan, was born. Ethan grew up chasing butterflies in that yard, riding his first bike down that cracked driveway. He was such a good boy, always smiling, always eager to help. I never imagined that same boy would one day hand me a check and tell me to leave the only place that ever felt like home. Back then, he was full of dreams, talking about how he'd buy me a car, how he'd take care of me when I was old. I held on to those promises through every hardship, every lonely night after his father's death. But something changed the day he brought Clara home. Clara was beautiful. I won't deny that, elegant, polished, the kind of woman who could turn heads at any party. But there was something else behind that smile, something cold. When she first stepped into my living room, her eyes didn't linger on the family photos or the old piano Michael loved. They scanned the furniture, the chandelier, the marble counters, like she was already imagining what could be changed, what could be sold. She complimented everything, of course. "It's so charming," she said, her voice sweet as syrup. But I noticed how her manicured fingers brushed over the antique cabinets, how she wrinkled her nose at the scent of wood polish. That was the first time I saw something flicker in her gaze. Not love, not admiration, but calculation. As weeks passed, I began to sense her influence on Ethan. He used to visit every weekend, bringing groceries, fixing the little things around the house. After Clara came into the picture, the visits grew shorter, the calls fewer. "Mom, you don't need to cook for us," he'd say, smiling but distracted, always glancing at his phone. It was subtle at first how she'd correct him when he spoke, how she'd frown when I hugged him too long. Then came the comments about downsizing, about how a big house like this was too much for me to handle. I laughed it off, thinking it was just casual talk, but I should have known better. I should have realized that when love starts to sound like advice, it's often just control in disguise. Before I go on, if you've ever trusted someone so deeply only to have them turn your world upside down, don't scroll away. Because these stories, these lessons are reminders of how fragile loyalty can be. It wasn't sudden. It was little things, a missed birthday here, a forgotten promise there. At first, I told myself he was just busy. Work, marriage, life, they can swallow you whole. But deep down, I knew something was changing. The Sunday visits that once filled my house with laughter became occasional drop-ins. The calls that used to last an hour turned into rushed conversations. "Mom, I'll call you back," he'd say, but the call never came. I started setting 2 plates at the dinner table out of habit, one for me, one for him, though I knew he wouldn't show. The candlelight flickered against the empty chair, and I'd whisper a quiet prayer that maybe next Sunday would be different. Then, one evening, he called. His voice was calm but distant, like he was reading from a script. "Mom," he said, "you should sell the house. It's too big for you now." My chest tightened. "This house kept me alive after your father died," I told him softly. "Don't ask me to bury him twice." There was silence on the other end, the kind that says everything words can't. Finally, he sighed and said, "You don't understand, Mom. Things are different now." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the line went dead before I could. After that night, his tone changed. He began talking like a stranger, polite, formal, cautious. He'd visit once in a while, usually when Clara had errands nearby. She never stayed long, always checking her watch, always finding a reason to leave. And when Ethan was with her, he looked smaller somehow, like a man walking on eggshells in his own life. I began to wonder if it was marriage that changed him, or the kind of love that demanded too much. The seasons passed, and the silence grew heavier. The mailbox filled with dust. My phone stayed quiet for days, then weeks. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at the front gate, hoping to see his car pull in like it used to. But all I saw were strangers passing by, living their own stories. And yet, something in my heart refused to give up on him. After all, he was my son, my only son. Then came the whispers. A neighbor mentioned seeing Ethan meeting someone downtown, a man who drove expensive cars and always wore flashy suits. She said she overheard them talking about easy money and quick returns. I brushed it off at first, refusing to believe my Ethan could get tangled in something reckless. But mothers always know, even when they don't want to. Late one night, as the rain tapped against the window, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the faint reflection of my face in the glass. I thought about Michael, about what he'd say if he could see what was happening to our boy. Maybe he'd tell me to trust him, to have faith. But faith doesn't pay for betrayal. It only makes it hurt more when it comes. And still, I didn't know it then, but that man Ethan was meeting wasn't just offering him easy money. He was about to offer him something far more dangerous, something that would take everything from both of us. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, one of those quiet days when the house felt too big and the air too still. I was watering the flowers on the porch when Ethan's car pulled into the driveway. My heart lifted a little, foolishly hopeful. It had been nearly 2 months since I last saw him. He walked up with that familiar smile, though it didn't reach his eyes anymore. "Mom," he said softly, "I need you to sign some papers. Just tax stuff. You know how complicated these things get with property and inheritance." I hesitated, but when your own child says, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of it. You don't expect a knife in your back." He laid the papers neatly on the dining table, each page clipped and highlighted. I reached for my glasses, scanning the lines, but the words blurred together: transfer, authorization, joint ownership. It all sounded harmless enough. I asked, "Are you sure this is just about taxes?" He smiled again, that same easy grin from his childhood, and said, "Of course, Mom. You trust me, don't you?" That question, "You trust me, don't you?" I'd answered it 1,000 times in his life without hesitation. And so, I signed. The pen felt heavy in my hand, almost unwilling. My name bled onto the paper, looping across the lines like a quiet surrender. When I finished, he gathered the documents quickly, folding them into a brown envelope. "Thanks, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek before heading out. I stood there, watching his taillights disappear down the street, trying to shake off the strange feeling in my gut. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right, but I told myself I was overthinking. Mothers always worry too much. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I could almost hear Michael's voice whispering from the walls, warning me to be careful. But it was too late. Across town, Clara was celebrating. I didn't see it, but I could imagine it: the clink of champagne glasses, her polished smile gleaming under the soft glow of their kitchen lights. To her, it wasn't about love or family. It was about winning. And now, she had just taken her first victory. The next few days passed quietly. Ethan didn't call, and I didn't ask. I told myself he was busy, that maybe he just needed space. But deep down, something inside me began to ache in a way I couldn't explain. There's a special kind of pain that only a mother knows, the feeling that something precious is slipping away, and you can't stop it. Have you ever trusted someone you love, only to realize too late that they were using you? Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that kind of heartbreak, because no one deserves to go through it alone. Then, a few days later, it happened. The mailman left a thick white envelope on my porch, my name printed neatly in bold letters. I sat at the table, my hands trembling as I tore it open. Inside were documents from the county registrar's office. My eyes darted across the lines, struggling to make sense of them. And then I saw it: my name, scratched out and replaced with Ethan's. The house, the deed, the land, all of it, was now under his name alone. For a moment, the room went silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. It wasn't just a paper I'd signed. It was my home, my memories, my husband's legacy, all gone with the stroke of my pen. Days later, I got a letter that shattered everything I believed about my son. The letter came on a Wednesday morning, folded neatly inside a white envelope stamped with the bank's seal. I almost didn't open it at first. Something in my chest told me that whatever it contained would change everything. When I finally tore it open, my eyes froze on the numbers $1,500,000. The line below read, "Transfer confirmed, property sold, and funds deposited to beneficiary's account." My fingers went numb, the paper slipping from my hands to the floor. My son had done it. The house Michael built with his bare hands, the home I had poured my entire life into, was gone, sold without a single word to me. I sat there in silence, the air heavy with disbelief. For a long time, I couldn't move. I couldn't cry. It felt like the walls themselves were mourning, whispering the echoes of a family that no longer existed. That evening, Ethan came over. His face was calm, too calm, and his tone carried the kind of finality that left no room for hope. I stood in the doorway as he stepped inside, his shoes clicking against the wooden floor that his father had once sanded with care. "Ethan," I managed to say, my voice barely steady, "I got a letter from the bank. Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't sell this house." He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check. "You signed it, Mom," he said, his voice cold, detached. "It's done. You should be happy I gave you something." And with that, he tossed the check onto the table like it meant nothing. It landed face up. $20,000, that was the value he placed on 40 years of love. On the roof that sheltered him, on the kitchen that fed him, on the father who worked himself to exhaustion so his son would never go without. I looked at the paper, at those numbers scrawled across it, and felt something inside me break, not from anger, but from sorrow. He had taken everything, not just the house, but the bond between us. I asked, quietly, "Ethan, how could you do this to me?" He didn't meet my eyes. "You'll be fine, Mom. It's too big a house for you anyway. You can find a smaller place, maybe something outside the city, somewhere quiet." Then he walked toward the door. No apology, no hesitation, just distance. As the sound of his car faded into the night, I sank into the empty living room. The curtains swayed gently in the breeze, brushing against the window where Michael's photograph still sat. I clutched the check in my hand, my fingers trembling. $20,000, for everything I'd ever known. I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered, "This is all I'm worth to you?" Hours passed before I could move again. I wandered through each room, touching the walls, running my hands along the staircase, the kitchen counter, the windowsills, all the places that once held laughter and warmth. Each touch felt like a goodbye. By the time the sun had set, I found myself sitting in the middle of the floor, surrounded by shadows. But in that darkness, something inside me began to harden, not hatred, but resolve. That night, while he celebrated in his new home with Clara, probably raising a glass to their cleverness, counting the money that came from my loss, I was already planning what he would never see coming. The morning after Ethan handed me that check, I woke up to a silence so deep, it almost hurt. For the first time in 40 years, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the folded paper on the nightstand, the one that carried the price of my humiliation, $20,000. Outside, the yard was quiet, the maple tree shedding its last golden leaves, the same tree Michael had planted the year Ethan was born. I could almost hear his voice in the wind, the way he used to say, "Take care of our home, honey. Promise me, no matter what happens, this land stays ours." Those words echoed in my head all morning, and with each passing minute, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't ready to be buried in pity. Not yet. Not while I still had breath in me. By noon, I made a decision. I picked up my purse, slipped on my old coat, and took the bus downtown. The ride felt endless, gray buildings passing by, people lost in their own thoughts, the hum of city life blurring into noise. When I stepped off near the courthouse, I walked straight to the office of my husband's old lawyer, Mr. Wallace. He had handled everything for us after Michael's passing, a kind man with silver hair and eyes that always seemed to understand more than they said. When I entered, he looked up, surprised but warm. "Mrs. Turner?" he said gently. "It's been a while. What brings you here?" I sat down across from him, my hands clutching my bag tightly. "It's about the house, Mr. Wallace," I began. "Ethan sold it behind my back. He had me sign something, and I didn't realize." My voice cracked. "He took everything, even the land Michael worked so hard for." Mr. Wallace frowned, his expression tightening as he reached for his files. "I see," he murmured. "Let me look at something." He opened a drawer, pulled out a folder marked Turner Estate, and began flipping through the old documents. Minutes passed in heavy silence until he stopped suddenly, his eyes narrowing at one page. "Wait a moment," he said, sliding the paper toward me. "Do you remember this clause?" I leaned forward, adjusting my glasses, and read the faded typewritten lines aloud. "Under no circumstance shall the property at 217 Maple Grove be transferred, leased, or sold to any entity or person outside the Turner bloodline. Violation of this clause renders the sale legally void and subject to immediate reversal." I looked up at him. My breath caught. "You mean he can't sell it?" Mr. Wallace nodded firmly. "Not legally. Your husband was very specific about that. He must have known something like this could happen." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope stir in me. I remembered that day long ago, the last spring we spent together before Michael passed. We had been sitting under the porch swing, the same one he built by hand, when he turned to me with that quiet seriousness he always had. "Promise me, Grace," he said, taking my hand. "Promise me this land stays ours even when I'm gone. Don't let anyone, not even family, take it away from you." At the time, I thought he was being sentimental, just a man afraid of being forgotten. I didn't realize then that he was protecting me even from the grave. As I sat there in the lawyer's office, the weight of those words settled over me. My husband had seen the world. He'd seen greed turn brothers against brothers, children against parents. He'd seen how money could twist love into something ugly. And somehow, even after his death, he had found a way to shield me. I looked up at Mr. Wallace, my voice steady now. "What do I need to do?" He handed me a copy of the deed and said quietly, "Everything is still in your favor. You just need to act fast before the sale clears legally. Once the funds are frozen and the buyers are notified, they'll realize they bought something they never truly owned." I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my purse. As I stood to leave, he gave me a knowing look. "Your husband was a wise man, Mrs. Turner, and I think he'd be proud of what you're about to do." I walked out of that office taller than I had entered. The cold wind bit at my cheeks, but I didn't feel it. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving, I was waking up. The woman my son thought he could fool was gone. In her place stood the wife of a man who planned ahead, who believed in justice even beyond his own lifetime. So I began preparing quietly while they thought I was broken. The following morning, I woke up before dawn. The city was still quiet, the streets outside dimly lit, the world suspended between night and day. I brewed a cup of coffee, sat at my small kitchen table, and laid out every document Mr. Wallace had given me. The deed, the clause, the notarized papers all spread out neatly like puzzle pieces waiting to be completed. My hands didn't tremble this time. The grief that had once paralyzed me had turned into focus, sharp and deliberate. I whispered softly to myself. He thought my silence meant defeat, but silence can be the loudest revenge. I put on my old gray coat, tied a scarf around my neck, and left for the city office. The morning air was biting cold, but I barely felt it. My steps were steady as I entered the government building, a tall, echoing place that smelled of paper, ink, and determination. At the counter, a young clerk looked up, polite but distracted. "Ma'am, how can I help you?" I slid the deed across the glass and said, "I need to file a property claim under inheritance protection law. This land was sold illegally." She looked at me, surprised, then began typing. "Do you have proof of the clause?" I handed her the copy, my late husband's signature still crisp at the bottom. She read it twice, eyebrows lifting slightly. "You might have something here, Mrs. Turner. I'll send this to our legal review department immediately. You'll get a notice within 48 hours. When I stepped outside, the sun was climbing, golden light spilling across the sidewalks. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I wasn't helpless anymore. I was doing something. Every step I took from that moment carried purpose. I went next to the county records office, filed a motion to freeze the transaction, and met with a city attorney who promised to investigate the sale. Each signature I made that day wasn't just ink on paper. It was a piece of my strength returning, a quiet defiance building inside me. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan and Clara were celebrating. I didn't see it, but I could picture it clearly: the candlelit restaurant, the sound of laughter, the glint of wine glasses raised in a toast. Clara, in her expensive dress, probably leaned in close and whispered, "We did it." And Ethan, my own son, probably smiled with that same confidence he once used to charm me. They thought they had won. They thought the money would wash away the guilt, the lies, the betrayal. But while they dined on luxury and arrogance, I was writing the first chapter of their undoing. That night, back in my small apartment, I knelt beside my bed. My hands clasped together, I prayed not for revenge, but for strength. "Lord," I whispered, "you've seen my pain. You've seen what they've done. Give me wisdom, give me patience, and let the truth rise when the time is right." The air was still, but somehow I felt a quiet assurance wrap around me, like Michael's presence beside me once more. It wasn't just faith. It was certainty that what was meant to destroy me would soon deliver justice. Have you ever known a mother who gave everything she had to her children, only to be left behind when they rose higher? If this story reminds you of someone who gave everything to their children and got nothing but pain in return, please share this video. It might help another mother remember her worth. Over the next few days, I moved silently, watching everything unfold. The bank called Ethan, informing him of the transaction freeze. The buyers were notified that the sale was under legal review. Panic must have started to set in, though I hadn't yet seen it with my own eyes. I stayed quiet, waiting, knowing that the real reckoning hadn't even begun. And soon, karma knocked louder than I ever could. The morning the storm finally hit, it was silent, the kind of silence that comes before something shatters. I remember sitting by my window, sipping tea, watching the city slowly wake. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but I could already sense it, the shift, the ripple in the air. Somewhere across town, my son's perfect little world was beginning to crumble. At precisely 9:14 a.m., Ethan received a call from the bank. He was in his office, probably leaning back in his leather chair, that familiar smirk on his face, when the manager's voice broke through his confidence. "Mr. Turner," the man said carefully, "there seems to be an issue with your funds. The $1.5 million from the property sale, it's been temporarily frozen due to a pending legal dispute." "What?" Ethan's voice rose, sharp and disbelieving. "That can't be right. The deal was cleared. The money's mine." "I'm sorry, sir," the banker replied, his tone professional but apologetic. "A claim's been filed, citing a restriction on the property title, something about an inheritance clause. Until it's resolved, we're unable to release the funds." Ethan's hands must have started to shake, because the papers on his desk fluttered to the floor. He ended the call abruptly, his pulse pounding, and dialed the real estate agent. "You said everything was clean," he barked. The agent stammered. I didn't know about any clause. The buyer's lawyers just reached out. They're threatening to sue if the sale doesn't finalize soon." Ethan slammed his fist against the desk. His empire, the one he'd built on betrayal, was collapsing right before his eyes. By evening, the chaos had fully unfolded. The buyer had indeed filed a lawsuit demanding restitution and damages. The luxury condo Ethan and Clara had already placed a down payment on was now at risk. Their accounts were frozen, their names circulating among lawyers and financial offices. The walls of security they'd wrapped around themselves were cracking fast. And Clara, she didn't take it well. "What do you mean the deal's frozen?" she screamed, pacing their marble-floored living room. "You told me it was safe, Ethan. You promised." "It's temporary," he muttered, his voice trembling, eyes fixed on the frozen account notice glowing from his laptop screen. "It's all going to be fixed." "Fixed?" she scoffed. "You sold your mother's house illegally. How can you fix that? You've ruined us." Her anger was pure fire, the kind that burns through love. That night, their argument echoed through the apartment like thunder. Words turned to accusations. Accusations turned to silence. And by morning, Clara was gone, her things packed, her wedding ring left on the counter beside an untouched cup of coffee. Ethan sat there in the dim light, his head buried in his hands. The phone kept buzzing with calls from lawyers, the bank, the buyer's representatives. He didn't answer any of them. His reflection stared back at him from the dark screen, a man stripped bare of everything he'd used to define himself. Money, pride, family, gone. For the first time, my son felt the weight of his own choices, and for once, I didn't rush to lift it off him. I didn't call to comfort him, didn't offer him a place to stay, didn't pray away his consequences. I simply let him face them. Sometimes, the only way a child learns the meaning of love, real love, is through the silence of a mother who finally steps back. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping gently against my window. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, in the form of balance." But there was still one thing left to do, the final lesson. The knock on his door that evening wasn't loud, just a soft, deliberate rhythm. 3 times. Enough to make him pause, glance up from the bottle of whiskey beside him, and wonder if he'd imagined it. The apartment was dim, cluttered, and smelled faintly of stale coffee and regret. He'd been living like that for weeks, curtains drawn, messages ignored, bills piling up. When he finally opened the door, he froze. I stood there, holding a small brown envelope in my hands, the same one he'd tossed across the table weeks ago with a check inside. That $20,000 gift. I could see the shock ripple across his face, then shame. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair unkempt, his shirt wrinkled. For the first time since he was a child, he looked small again, not in stature, but in spirit. "Mom," he whispered, his voice dry and uncertain. "What are you doing here?" I stepped inside slowly, my eyes scanning the small rental 1-bedroom, peeling wallpaper, a broken chair in the corner. A single light flickered above the sink. It was, in every way, the dump outside the city he had told me to go buy. I placed the envelope on the small dining table. "You told me to buy a dump outside the city," I said softly. "So I thought I'd visit one. How's it feel?" The words hung in the air, sharp but calm, not vengeful, just true. He turned away, pressing his palms to his face. "Mom, please, don't," he muttered, his voice cracking. "I know. I messed up. I ruined everything." I walked over to the table, opened the envelope, and took out the check, still untouched, still crisp and folded neatly. I laid it flat in front of him. "You can keep your money, Ethan," I said. "It was never about that. I just wanted you to remember what this house really meant, what we built in it, who we were inside it. You sold it like it was a piece of wood and stone, but it was our life." He sank into the chair, his hands trembling. Tears began to fall quietly at first, then freely. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I was doing the smart thing." "Smart?" I echoed, sitting across from him. "You thought taking from your own mother was smart? You let greed blind you, Ethan. You didn't just sell a house, you sold your father's promise, your childhood, and the trust we built, brick by brick." He looked up, his eyes swollen, guilt etched deep into his face. "I don't know how to fix it," he whispered. "I don't even know where to start." For a long moment, I didn't speak. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the broken fridge. I watched him, my son, once so full of pride, now stripped of everything. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. He had tears in his eyes, not because he lost money, but because he finally lost me. I reached across the table, gently covering his trembling hand with mine. "You start," I said quietly, "by remembering who you are, and by never forgetting what it feels like to lose everything you took for granted." He nodded, crying harder now. I stood, turning toward the door, pausing just before stepping out. "And Ethan," I added softly, "for what it's worth, I forgive you." His breath caught. He looked up, eyes wide, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. And then, I did something even he didn't deserve. I forgave him. Outside, The city lights flickered in the distance, the wind carrying the faint sound of traffic and life moving on. As I walked away, I felt lighter not because justice had been served, but because I had finally set down the weight of bitterness. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't for the one who hurt you. It's the final act of reclaiming your own peace. The morning was quiet, soft sunlight spilling through the lace curtains of my small apartment. On the table before me lay the final document, neatly stamped and sealed. The same house my husband built with his hands, the one my son sold with his signature, was finally finding its true purpose. I walked through the old gate one last time, the air still heavy with the scent of pine and paint. But this time, it wasn't sadness that filled me. It was peace. The once empty living room now echoed with laughter. Volunteers moved about with brushes in hand, rolling fresh coats of white across the walls that had once held only silence. A group of children chased each other through the backyard, their giggles bright as morning bells. In the kitchen, a few women stood together, chatting over steaming cups of tea. Women who had once been where I was. Widows. Forgotten. Left behind. The house became a home for women like me, widows who'd lost everything but hope. My husband would have smiled. As I walked slowly through the halls, I could almost hear his voice again, deep, warm, filled with that steady faith that always carried us through the hardest times. Promise me, when I'm gone, this home still stands for something good. Back in the present, I placed a framed photograph of him on the mantel, the one where he's laughing in his work boots, arms crossed, covered in sawdust from the day he finished the last room. The gold plaque beneath it read, "The John Matthews Memorial Home, in honor of the man who built with love and left behind strength." Outside, a small group of volunteers gathered for the dedication ceremony. A young woman, maybe 30, holding a baby on her hip, stepped forward and hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've given us more than a house. You've given us a second chance." I smiled through the tears forming in my eyes. "No," I said softly. "You've given this place a heartbeat again." It wasn't revenge that healed me. It was purpose. My husband built that home with love, and even after all the betrayal, that love is what remained standing. My husband built a house. I turned it into hope. And somehow, I think that's exactly what he wanted all along. The sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The air was calm, carrying the soft rustle of leaves as I knelt by the garden outside the community home, the same soil my husband once tilled with his bare hands. My fingers brushed across the petals of the marigolds I'd planted with the other women, bright, stubborn blooms that seemed to rise no matter how many times they were cut down. My son lost a house. I gained peace. Sometimes, revenge isn't about hurting back, it's about healing forward. Children's laughter echoed from the open windows. A few of the widows waved as they passed by, their faces lighter than the day before. I smiled and waved back, a quiet warmth spreading through me, the kind that doesn't come from victory, but from release. For so long, I had carried pain like armor, waiting for the moment justice would feel sweet. But it never did. What filled me instead was something softer, something lasting. Forgiveness. Understanding. The freedom to finally let go of what was lost and embrace what was left. The wind carried the faint scent of lavender from the garden beds as I stood and looked toward the sky, whispering a silent thank you not to my son, not even to myself, but to the man who started it all, my husband. Because through his wisdom, even after death, he taught me that no one can steal peace from a heart that chooses to heal. Greed can make you rich in money, but poor in spirit. Love, that's the only inheritance worth leaving behind. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single comment. And if stories like this touch your heart, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it.